You're listening to the Nutrition Experts Podcast, featuring guests who take the scientific talk about food and break it down for practical use. You've heard the phrase, "You are what you eat." Come find out what that really means. Experience conversations with experts in the field of nutrition and understand the power of food for our health, well-being, and beyond. Now, here's your host, registered dietitian and nutritionist, Mathea Ford.
Hi there, it's Mathea. Welcome back to the Nutrition Experts Podcast, the podcast featuring nutrition experts who are leading the way by using food. Starts today, right now, with our next guest. It's great to have Esther Avant on the show today. Esther, welcome to Nutrition Experts.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here.
Esther, I'm excited to talk to you today. Can you tell my listeners a little more about you and what you do?
I'd love to. My name is Esther Avant, and I am a nutrition coach and also a personal trainer. I specialize in women's weight loss, and my clients are typically what I refer to as kind of do-gooders. They work in selfless fields like nursing, social work, that kind of thing. Basically caregivers who just put everyone and everything before themselves. And we work a lot on breaking old patterns and habits and taking a multifaceted approach to not just losing weight, but also becoming happier, healthier, and more confident.
So that's a really interesting market, because how do you get someone to stop putting everybody else ahead of them, even though they know it's detrimental to their health? Like you said, they're caregivers, they're nurses, they're other healthcare. They know that they need to exercise, lose weight, whatever, but how do you start to get them to think differently?
A lot of it is in how you frame it, that typically these women are so selfless that they don't want to, put themselves first. It feels like, there's so many other people I could be helping. That's not the best use of my time. But when you kind of reframe the thought into, think about how much better you'll be able to help people, or how many more people you'll be able to help if you're feeling your best, if you're not tired, if you're not missing work for medical appointments, if you're just, if you're not feeling good overall, how well can you really help other people? And I think putting it in that light helps women realize, oh, you know what? It's not selfish to take care of myself. It's actually doing the people who are relying on me a disservice if I don't take care of myself, because then I can't help them as well.
So what types of things do you usually start with when somebody is determining the best weight loss approach? How do you figure out what is the best way to help them with weight loss? Or if that's even not necessarily your first target, so to speak?
So I think the most important thing in a lot of things, but is communicating. When I do an initial call with a new client, I want to know, what their goals are, and not just the surface value of, I want to lose weight, but, really why? What is the emotional root of your goal? Is it because you're scared that you're dependent on these prescription medications and you want to get off them to live a long, healthy, happy life? Is it that you feel like your weight is holding you back in your career, and that if you took better care of yourself and lost some weight and were healthier, you would be able to advance? Things like that a lot of times it's not just about the weight, it's about something deeper and more emotional. So uncovering that is really important to start off. And then I'm really big on not trying to squeeze a square peg into a round hole. And I think that's an issue with a lot of the weight loss industry, is that some coaches and some businesses can be really dogmatic in their philosophy, that if you're not following this type of diet, you're wrong, that kind of thing. And it just ends up confusing people and ultimately paralyzing them into doing nothing. And really, there isn't just one way that works. Lots of things work. And it's about figuring out what works for a certain person, and more specifically, what works for that person at this time in their lives. And if I were too married to a certain idea or a certain philosophy, then I would be doing my clients a disservice. So I think the most important thing at first is being open-minded and recognizing that there's no one way that's going to work best for everybody. And kind of we both need to recognize that, in the short term, kind of some of those more cookie cutter approaches often do work. But when you start thinking long term or about how to not gain the weight back, that's when it becomes a different story. And it's a matter of being able to stick with something long enough that you reap the benefits. So in my coaching calls with clients, or in, initial meetings, or even just in a lot of blog posts and content that I put out, I encourage women to think about a number of different things. But, one being, are you someone who does well with moderation? Or do you feel like if you give yourself an inch, you take a mile? Balance and moderation are like really in vogue, but they're not necessarily the best idea for everyone. And there was actually a Gretchen Rubin book that talked about these different personality types and how some people just operate better when they give themselves more black and white guidelines. So just as an example, like there's nothing inherently wrong about eating at night. Calories are still calories. It doesn't matter what time of day. So there's no like scientific reason necessarily to stop eating at a certain time. But some people actually find it easier to have just a personal rule of I don't eat after 8. And it's not because those calories will immediately show up on their thighs or anything like that. It's just because it's easier than bargaining with themselves night after night about whether they should have dessert or have a snack. So the same thing goes for weight loss approaches that eliminate or restrict certain foods or certain times of eating. Maybe the whole thing just feels easier if you don't have to think so much about it and you just follow, the quote unquote rules. So that's one thing to consider is, do you like having rules, or do they just by their existence, does it make you want to rebel against them? So that's a factor that can play into what kind of approach you take. Another thing is, are you drawn to a more introspective, kind of touchy-feely approach? Or are you somebody who likes numbers, who likes hard data? Because intuitive or mindful eating is an approach where you pay close attention to your body, what it's telling you it needs, how you're feeling, if you're eating for reasons other than true hunger, how different foods make you feel, things like that. And working on becoming a more intuitive eater is a skill that really would benefit all of us, but for some it comes easier than others. So someone very in tune with her body and her emotions might really thrive in that kind of intuitive-based approach. Whereas if you have somebody who really likes numbers, likes having data and targets and being really specific, then someone with that kind of drive might go absolutely crazy trying to be more intuitive right off the bat. It might feel really intangible and like out there, and they would do better focusing on something numerical, whether it's calories or macronutrients, while learning about the energy content of foods and things of that nature. So that's another consideration is, do you prefer to introspect and rely on your intuition to guide your food choices, or would you rather take a more numbers-based approach?
You reframe a little bit and you talk to them about how it's going to be better to be healthier, lose weight, and they agree. But how do you really get that commitment? Because I think we all know it's better. And of course, if knowing was the way to lose weight, we would all be thin. But but how do you get to that agreement or commitment to do the things that they need to do, whatever they are, mindful, calorie restriction, not eating certain times? How do you get to that?
And that's something that earlier in my coaching career, I struggled a lot with, of like, I know what these people need. Why won't they just listen to me and like do what I say? And through the course of various certifications and continuing education, I was introduced to, I guess, a theory or a practice called motivational interviewing, which helps someone like me help a client make their own choices and decisions that just by human nature. If you go to the doctor and he says, you need to start eating better because you have high blood pressure, you're going to, smile and nod, and you're probably going to continue doing what you always do. And that's because, that's kind of being dictated to you, is like, you have to do this. And you're like, well, I don't want to. I don't want you to tell me what to do. And the same thing goes, with working with clients in my field as well, that if I were to just tell you, you have to do this because it's good for you, you don't have the buy-in really. And the buy-in comes from, I think, two things. One is uncovering that emotional reason for their goal, that, you're not just doing this because you want to lose weight. You're doing this because you want to live a long life to see your grandkids grow up. that kind of gives you some perspective and an emotional root of, why am I doing this again? Oh yeah, it's actually really important to me because of this reason. And the other thing is to work with the client to have them figure out what they want their next step to be. I'm not going to tell you this is what you have to do. We're going to figure out together, what do you want to do? And even if it might not necessarily be what I think is, the best first step, I will, kind of gently say, here's my suggestions. What do you think about this? Or, where would you like? I can lead the conversation, but ultimately at the end of the day, it's the client's decision to say, here's where I want to start. This is what I want to focus on. And better to be consistently doing something in the right direction than having all of these starts and stops where you don't really make any progress. So even if I think, okay, this person has, they're drinking so many liquid calories, it would make a huge difference if they just, quit the frappuccinos and quit the soda. If I present that as a possibility and they absolutely shoot it down, okay, then we're not going to start there. Where feels comfortable to you? What are you willing to work on right now? And let's just take it from there. And that way you're in charge. You are the catalyst behind the change. I'm just kind of guiding you along the way.
So how do you talk to people who really want this tomorrow? Like they want, so, there's on one hand, there's people who are willing to take small steps and understand that it's to use a often used phrase, it's a marathon, not a sprint. But what about those people that are like, oh, I'm going to start exercising 60 minutes a day, and I'm going to get up and meditate for a half an hour, and I'm only going to eat 1,200 calories, and they're going to do everything right now. How do you manage that? Or maybe you don't ever experience that.
The vast majority of clients do exactly that. And I'm guilty of it myself in other areas where you're just like, I want this, I want it now, and now I'm motivated, I'm going to change everything, and it's going to be great, and today my life changes. And, we all know from experience that is rarely how it pans out. So I think you've identified two really important things here. One is having unrealistic expectations, and two is trying to do too much at once. So on the realism front, we have a conversation about with regards to weight loss, specifically with, what is healthy, realistic weight loss. Reality shows, like when The Biggest Loser was in its prime, it was really skewing people's expectations because you'd see somebody losing, 24 pounds a week. And you'd think, okay, well, I'm not on the show. I have my life going on. Maybe I'll only lose half that. Maybe I'll only lose 12 pounds a week. And then when you lose 2 pounds, which is actually, within a very healthy and safe range, you feel like an absolute failure. You're like, I only lost 2 pounds out of my 12-pound goal. Like, what am I doing wrong? Forget this. So part of it is just education on, what even is realistic. And the second part, kind of addressing doing too much at once. One of the most successful approaches that I've ever taken, and I use it on myself all the time, is somebody says, like you were saying, I'm going to wake up at 6 a.m. and I'm going to meditate and I'm going to exercise every day and I'm going to eat all these vegetables and I'm going to do everything perfectly. I'll smile and nod and I'll say, okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, how confident are you that you can do that this week, whatever that goal might be? And typically when I don't know if it's the sliding scale or what, but typically when you ask somebody to assign a number to it, they actually take a step back and they're like, ooh, you know what? Like I've had clients say before, like, I think I'm like a 4. I'm like, okay, that's fine. But what if we scaled the goal back to something that you're more confident you could do? Do you think it would feel better and might be more motivating if you set a smaller goal that you just knocked out of the park, as opposed to set this like really ambitious goal and then fell short? Because what I see time and time again is you miss a day. You said you were going to do every day. You miss a day. You feel like a failure. You skip the next day. And then you end up like in that cycle where, every Monday you're starting over again. So what's more realistic? What are you 90% confident that you could do? What's a 9 out of a 10? And it might mean scaling it way back. It might mean, I think I can do 1 day this week. Okay, great. Then do that 1 day. Give yourself a pat on the back. That's your accomplishment. Feel good about it. And then when you feel ready, this upcoming week, what's your next goal? Make it a little bit bigger. Do you think you can do a second day? Do you think, whatever it is? And not just, setting those more realistic goals, but also addressing preemptively what obstacles you might foresee. So, say you're only going to do one morning to work out next week. What happens if you don't? What if you set that morning and you sleep through your alarm? What's your plan B? So it really comes down to having that realistic plan of attack, anticipating the obstacles that might occur, and then being prepared to handle them when or if they do happen. And that's really what it boils down to, is set goals that are action-based, make them so small that they're almost fail-safe, meet or exceed your own expectations, and then set the bar a little higher the following week. And it can be challenging at first to wrap your head around, like, you want me to do less? Like, this is never going to work. I need to do more. But typically it only takes a few weeks of that consistent behavior to be like, wow, you know what? I'm really experiencing a snowball here. That just the fact that I'm accomplishing my goals is motivating me to be more health conscious when I'm eating, to walk more, to all sorts of things. It just can kind of snowball, and it just stems from getting that early win and building some confidence in yourself.
When you're talking to your clients, how do you help them to really figure out what is going to work? Because I guess in a way, like, we all know kind of the things to do: exercise, eat right. But how do they figure out what's working for them? And then how do they measure that? Like, do you help them to be able to see the difference between, like, you started with once a week exercising, now you're at 5? Or how do they figure out what's going to work to help them to achieve that goal, whatever it is?
The starting point is having a conversation about what has or hasn't worked in the past. Is just as an example, a client will come and say, I've lost 40 pounds with Weight Watchers 3 times. And it's like, if you have to keep losing the same weight over and over again, has it really worked? Like, you don't want to be beating your head against a wall, doing the same thing over and over and wondering why it's not working. You want to learn from your past and use that as your guide to guide your future decisions. As for, how to determine what's working, I'm a big advocate of data collection and using a variety of progress indicators. A lot of times women are very caught up in the scale, which is totally normal, but a lot of us know that we don't necessarily have the healthiest relationship with the scale, that it can, make or break your day. It can make you feel like either a success or a failure, but everything is kind of riding on that number. So with some clients who have, a history of disordered behavior with a scale, I'll encourage them not to even use it at all. But even when we do use a scale, it's in conjunction with a variety of other indicators. So I really like using circumference measurements, because those are a really good way to see changes in your body that you might not pick up on otherwise, and kind of see that recomposition where maybe the scale isn't moving much, but it's because you are dropping fat and putting on muscle, and the shape of your body is changing, even though the mass isn't necessarily. I'm also really a big fan of progress photos, which oftentimes clients are reluctant to do, either initially or always, but I've never had a single person tell me that they regret having the pictures. That as hard as they might be to take in the beginning, they can be so telling that when you hit, inevitably, you're not going to be motivated all the time. Inevitably, you're going to hit these times where you're just kind of grinding along and you're like, oh, I'm still doing this, and I feel like I'm not seeing any changes. When you have those pictures to compare, it can be undeniable. Similarly, how clothing fits. So I've had a lot of clients, not even do it really intentionally, but, they'll put on a workout shirt that they wear all the time, and they're like, this used to be way tighter. This is fitting differently now. Or belt loops or things like that. So those are kind of the number-based means of gauging progress. And then I think it's really important to also focus on other stuff too. Like you mentioned, energy levels. Are you hitting that 3 p.m. slump, or are you feeling, like you can power through the day? Are you sleeping better or longer, or falling asleep more easily? The gym is a great way to gauge progress. Is a lot of my clients start off having pretty minimal recent workout experience, And they'll go from either being unable to do certain things or from using a very light weight. And they can just see over time, I used to do 5 pounds on this and now I'm doing 20. Or I used to have to walk after 3 minutes of jogging and now I can jog a whole mile. That there are just so many things besides the scale that can help us determine whether we're on the right track. And I work with clients to figure out what's important to you. How will you know if you're being successful? And yes, if you want the scale to be a factor, it can, but what else? Even if, if your goal weight, if your dream body was 10 pounds heavier than the number you thought it would be, how would you know that you were successful? What would that look like? What would that feel like? What would your life be like? And then those are the things we look at week after week to say, okay, we're trending in the right direction, or you know what? We're not seeing the results that we want. How can we shift gears to be more successful?
So what are some of the consistent changes that you've seen people make? You said you've been doing this for 12 years at least. And the changes that people make that seem to work the best in the long term. I know that individuals have different things that happen, but just a pattern. Have you seen a pattern or anything that consistently works over the long term?
One of the things I think is really important in the long term is knowledge about the energy content of food. And I'm not an advocate of counting calories or tracking macros indefinitely, but I think as a tool, it can be really useful because a lot of people, if I even say the word calorie or macronutrient, they don't know what that means. They don't know what appropriate portions are. They don't know how their lifestyle, their activity level, their job, their age, their sex, their gender, they don't know how that plays a role in how much food their body needs. So I think the clients who are willing to be educated on just kind of the nutrition basics do really, really well in the long term, because those are tools, those are skills that serve them long after they're tracking or they're weighing or measuring. I think within that specifically, learning about appropriate portion sizes is really important. And that can be as numbers based as using a food scale, or it can be a little bit more practical in the day-to-day sense, in that you use your hand as a guide of, okay, I want my protein to be about the size of my palm. I want a serving of fat to be about the size of my thumb. But just gaining that awareness, I guess that's, if I had to pick like an overarching theme, it would be awareness. That clients who are willing to pay attention and be mindful and increase their awareness on health-related things do best in the long term. And the ones who are willing and able to make the connections between, oh, I started doing this, and as a result, I'm feeling this, therefore I should keep doing it. Using that kind of, logical deduction makes a big difference. And then I guess to be more specific, clients who prioritize having a lean protein source at most, if not every meal, do well in the long term. Clients who prioritize eating a lot of vegetables do well in the long term. Clients who make an effort to slow down when they're eating, actually chew their food, actually taste it, allow the digestive process to do its thing, and pay attention to, am I stuffed? Or, can I pump the brakes a little bit sooner so that I'm not feeling like I need a nap after a meal? That's a really important thing. And obviously an exercise habit is something I feel pretty strongly about. But even outside of that, clients who are successful long-term often embrace just kind of the active lifestyle overall. And I don't mean like you go for century bike rides and your downtime. I just mean you're inclined to, hey, I have to go from one end of the mall to the other. I'm going to walk instead of repark my car. Or I'm only going up 2 floors. I'll take the stairs. It's probably faster anyway. The people who are willing to just kind of embrace, I'll get in a little bit of activity whenever I can. That typically makes them successful in the long term as well.
I think those are great examples. And it's interesting because it's truly what we've known for a while. But once you kind of embrace it and understand that the calorie portion thing can be huge, it's because you don't pay attention to how much is in something usually.
Right. Right. And we have all these processed foods now that, if you're talking only about whole foods, your body is able to self-regulate pretty well. Those foods are relatively high volume. You start to feel full or satisfied around, what your body needs for portions. And then we get into these like super processed foods that you're not going to feel full after a serving of chips. Your body's not going to be like, oh, I think that's enough. You're just going to keep eating until, you reach the bottom or you run out of time or something happens. So, just kind of our internal checks and balances aren't able to work as well with foods that are made, in labs with who knows what.
Many people probably come to you and they've been cyclical dieters. So they'll diet, like you said, they lose the same 40 pounds on Weight Watchers and Weight Watchers is neither good nor bad. It's just how you manage it. But what do you think seems to keep people from continuing that healthy eating and exercise plan once they've seen some success? Like, why do they fall off the wagon?
I think one part of it is, I guess, probably subconscious, like self-sabotage, that if you've been wanting to lose weight for a long time and you've kind of convinced yourself that once I am this weight, everything is going to be better. I'm going to find love. I'm going to get promoted. I'm going to, whatever it is, that we kind of in the back of our mind somewhere are scared of reaching that goal, because what if we reach that goal and it doesn't change everything? So sometimes it can be easier to not reach it and not have to be confronted with that possibility than it is to, go full force ahead and then get there and potentially be like, oh, I'm thinner, but not much else has changed. That's one part of it, I think. Another is that I used to be very opposed to any kind of short-term diet or goal or anything like that. And I've changed my thinking on it some, because I get the appeal of seeing early wins, seeing results, kind of proving to yourself that you can do something, that you can do this. So I understand wanting to undertake, a challenge for 21 days or for a month or something like that, or to sign up for, a diet or a weight loss program that you just kind of do as you're told. I think the main issue that causes people to fall on and off the wagon and just be in that cycle of lose it, stop doing anything, gain it back, repeat, is that there's not really a transition plan from what you're doing to lose the weight to how you're going to keep it off. I think that's really the missing piece for a lot of people is, it's okay if the way you've lost it isn't maybe sustainable for the rest of your life, but you need to have that plan in place to help you get to something that is sustainable in the long term. So if you do Weight Watchers, and again, I'm not necessarily opposed to Weight Watchers either, it's just an easy example, but if you lose the weight with Weight Watchers and then you're like, okay, I'm at my goal now, I don't need this anymore, you need to do something to stop you from just reverting back to what you did before you lost the weight. And that's, I think, where the importance of working on your day-to-day habits in conjunction with whatever else you're doing is really important. That hopefully, however you've lost weight, has also been teaching you things like we were just talking about, portion control and macronutrients and listening to hunger and fullness cues and things like that, being more active in your day-to-day life, so that by the time you are at a healthy and happy weight, you are also equipped with all the skills that you need to maintain that weight loss just by kind of continuing to do what has become second nature.
Well, and I know about Weight Watchers, they do have a transition program and you're able to stay and come to meetings and over a period of time to help you sustain that. But it does seem to be that you need to change some on the inside as well. The stress and the anxiety and whatever factors it was that caused you to overeat have to change either your reaction to them or you have to change what's going on. Those are the things that we don't necessarily associate with why we're overweight, but they're definitely associated with why we're overweight.
Absolutely. 100%. You need to confront the root issue at some point. And I think, one of the main issues with a short-term approach is that it can just be a Band-Aid, that, you can kind of push yourself through anything for a few weeks. You can tell yourself, I committed to this program. I paid a lot of money for it. I'm going to make the most of it. You can do that temporarily. But if then afterwards you revert back to snacking in front of the TV every evening, then those results are going to be short-lived. So you're absolutely right that at some point you need to be confronting, how did I end up here? What's really at play? Am I an emotional eater? And if so, how am I going to work through those emotions in the future in a way that will not leave me putting the pounds back on? And that's where, hopefully you're working with someone qualified to help you do those things kind of concurrently. That, yes, we want you to start seeing the weight come off. We want you to see that what you're doing is working. Of course, we want you to be motivated to keep putting in the work. But at the same time, we also do need to be turning in a little bit and figuring out, okay, what patterns are there? What habits do I need to break? What do I need to work on changing within myself that is going to give me a different result long term? Because if you look at a lot of research, there's no shortage of ways to lose weight. The main issue is maintaining that. So you need to have that longer term outlook of, okay, it's not going to be fun. It's not glamorous to assess, why do I eat when I'm sad? And that's why we don't want to do it, because it's hard and it can be emotional and there's no easy answer. Nobody can just tell me, here's what you do. But if you really want those changes to stick, then you do have to, get a little bit introspective and figure out, okay, what's going to be different? How am I going to change, literally from the inside out to make it so I am a person who doesn't have to struggle every day to keep this weight off?
When you think about that, as far as having like a healthy life and weight loss, how do you help people measure that? Like we talked a little bit before about what are their goals? What do they want to do? Motivational interviewing. What are they willing to commit to? But how do you measure that you're now healthy, so to speak?
There's an obesity doctor in Canada, almost positive, his name is Yanni Friedhoff, who wrote a book I read years ago about weight loss and obesity. And in it, he talks about how the goal for all of his patients is for them to live the healthiest life that they enjoy. And that has stuck with me for years. And I've used it over and over again, because I think that's what it boils down to is, everybody's healthy life is going to look a little bit different. That, to a lot of people, they would kind of look at my life, my activity level, my diet, and be like, wow, she is like super into that stuff. And, there are certain other circles that would be like, oh, she's never done a marathon. She's never done an Ironman. She, doesn't eat by a certain way. She's just a recreational healthy person. So there's just such a spectrum of, whatever your norm is. And I think it's just about taking someone from their current norm, which is, by their own admission, less healthy than they would like it to be, and figuring out how much can we creep you up that spectrum until you reach a point where you're like, you know what, if I keep changing more, I'm going to totally hate my life. And that's a conversation that I have had often with clients and especially with, relatively thin women who say are, wanting to lose the last 2, 3, 5 pounds or get down to a certain body fat percentage is, that's possible. It certainly is doable. I know you're willing to work hard. You are physiologically capable of doing that, but is it worth it to you? If going from where you are now to that last little bit means sacrificing so much more of your, happiness, then is it really worth it? So sometimes it's just about figuring out, you know what, I'm doing pretty well most of the time, and that's good enough for me. That, I have an occasional drink, I have an occasional dessert, I don't feel bad about it, but overall, my habits are pretty healthy, then great. Then that is a healthy life and a healthy weight for you. I think the issue is when clients are too far one way or the other. Either they're, obsessively exercising and counting every morsel that goes into their bodies, or they just seem like they don't care at all about their health. And it's just about kind of working towards the middle until you strike your personal balance where you're like, you know what, I'm doing pretty well. I'm pretty healthy. I don't have any, major health concerns, and I'm doing the best I can. And I'm also enjoying just kind of living and, being social with people that I love and care about. And, and that makes me happy. And that's where balance is.
Yeah, I was going to ask you kind of how do you help them figure out what is out of balance and what is good balance point?
That depends not just on the person, but also like where they are in their lives. That, it's okay to be off balance sometimes. And I've even read a lot of places that there's no such thing as balance, that something is constantly getting more of your attention. So it's instead of like a seesaw perfectly balanced, it's like you're kind of going between one side is higher and the other side is higher. And as long as you're sort of rotating between priorities, then, there's no such thing as perfect balance. So there's that too. Like, for example, if your daughter is getting married and you're like, I want to look like the hottest mother of the bride that, this family has ever seen, then, maybe that's a time that you are going to be a little bit more, or even a lot more concerned and, caring about what you're eating, how much you're exercising. And maybe it's not sustainable long term, but you find a dress that you love, you look awesome in it, you look amazing in the pictures, you get tons of compliments, and you feel great. Then, then that was balanced for right then. And then as long as you're able to transition back to something that will be healthier in the long term, where you're like, okay, I'm going to ease up now. And I sacrificed a lot of time at work or with my family because I was at the gym so much. So now I'm going to devote more time to my job or to my family and kind of let that take a backseat. Like I'm not going to turn the dial all the way off. I'm not going to stop going. I'm just going to rebalance, recalibrate a little bit. That's big, is just figuring out like, okay, right now, what do you feel like you can do? Something I use often with clients is the idea of bare ass minimums, or we call them BAMs, and figure out like there are going to be times that, you are slammed at work. If you're an accountant and it's tax season and you are working 16-hour days, what's the minimum effort you can put to your health that you can still feel good about at the end of the day? Maybe it's making sure you eat a vegetable at dinner. Maybe it's making sure you walk for 30 minutes at lunch. There's always going to be kind of those ebbs and flows in what gets more of your attention. And I think as long as you're able to move from, flow from one to the other without shutting anything completely off, then you're in a pretty good place.
What are some ways you think that our listeners could use the information we've talked about today in their day-to-day life, whether they're seeing clients, seeing patients, or just for them personally? You have any kind of overarching ideas about how they could use it?
Yeah, I have a few. First one being to learn from your past instead of repeating the same mistakes. If something doesn't sit right with you, you don't have to do it, even if, half of your neighborhood has success with it. There are plenty of ways to skin a cat. Be open to just trying a bunch of things and see what's going to work for you. And that kind of goes right into the second one, which is to keep an open mind. If you're curious about something and you've done enough research to know that it's safe, give it a shot. Treat it like an experiment. You don't need to be married to a certain approach, and be willing to admit when or if it's not working for you. Is just kind of, there's nothing to say that you can't try something and give it your best effort for a month and say, you know what, that wasn't for me. I did my best and I just don't see it. I don't see it panning out. I'm going to do something else. There's nothing wrong with that, but keep an open mind about, you might have certain thoughts about, oh, you have to do this, or this is the only thing that'll work. And, just kind of be open to, having your mind changed. And then I think the last thing is something that we have talked about, but is so important that it bears repeating, is that at the end of the day, no matter how you approach your weight loss, the most important thing is that you're simultaneously working on building the habits that will allow you to keep the weight off when you stop dieting. So that means finding ways to incorporate regular movement and healthy foods into your day-to-day life in such a way that they don't feel like a chore or something that you're being forced to do. They just become what you do.
I think those are great ways. And we sometimes as a dietitian personally, I get very focused on what does the research say, what is kind of the, medical approved way or whatever. But if I pay attention to the other things outside of that, I can learn things from there. I can improve things. And that's also what my clients are listening to. So I need to know a little bit more about them. Maybe even, think about how it would work on in real life, just so that I can empathize and understand what they might be, thinking about too. So that's a great.
Yeah, I think those of us with, the degree, the science degree and the background and, that are kind of scientifically minded and like are interested in the research, it can be hard to kind of shelf that and think about it from like practical points also. Is that like, okay, just because research indicates something doesn't mean that there's no validity in, what this client is saying or what I keep hearing. And you need to kind of figure out where you mesh the anecdotal and the scientific to not forget that you're working with an actual person, not, a lab rat.
Yeah, absolutely. So Esther, I always try to ask my guest, what is your favorite food?
Well, so I'm pregnant right now. And I think that all of my favorite foods are just the ones that I can't have. So I want a rare steak. I want some sushi. I want some poke, which is huge here in Hawaii. So those are big right now, just because you always want what you can't have. In general, though, I'd say my favorites would be kind of run the gamut here: sweet potatoes, eggplant parm, pork nachos, and sour gummy candies.
Those all sound really good. What's pork nachos? Just nachos with some pulled pork on them?
Yeah.
Okay. And I personally don't know what poke is. So what is it?
So it's raw fish, like cubed raw fish, typically ahi, but you see salmon sometimes and octopus sometimes. But it's that like with sesame oil and like chive or green onion. Sometimes there's a spicy kind that's like with some kind of mayo. It's similar to like sashimi, just chopped up with some stuff. Yeah, but it's so good.
That explains why I don't know what it is, because I do not eat fish in general, but I also don't eat raw fish for sure. So
probably not for you then.
No, probably not. But I always find it interesting what is kind of trending, and people have started doing kind of these smoothie bowls and just everything bowls, putting together stuff. And so I think that's great. That's awesome. It used to be wraps, it used to be other things. So it's great as long as if you want to try new things and you can make it healthy, that's great. So Esther, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. It was a pleasure to have you on the show. I know my listeners have learned a lot about just thinking differently when it comes to even just changing habits, not necessarily weight loss, but changing habits for the long term, thinking differently about how that works long term. So if listeners want to connect with you, what is the best way to do that?
The best way would be my website, which is Esther Avant.com, EstherAvant. I'm also on Facebook. My business page is facebook.com/Esther Avant Wellness Coaching. And I'm on Instagram, where I do a lot of infographic content. And my handle there is @Esther.Avant.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to be here.
Well, guys, this has been another great episode of the Nutrition Experts Podcast, the podcast that is about learning more so you can do more with nutrition in your life.
You've just listened to an episode of the Nutrition Experts Podcast. Be sure to get more information about this week's episode at www.nutritionexpertspodcast.com. Tune in next time for another great conversation with a nutrition expert and expand your personal knowledge in the field of nutrition, one conversation at a time.